Hi, Chris. Liz, everybody. So why don't we go get going? Secretary Clauser, if you want to say some words. I'm also happy to walk through the agenda if you want me to, and kick us off. Secretary Clauser, would you like to say anything to start off? Sorry.
All right. Takes me about 5 minutes to get off mute every single time. Just can't quite get it. Thanks, David. Good to see everybody again. I think I'll let you run through the agenda, David. It looks like most of our steering committee agenda is to discuss Climate Council agenda. So I'll let you walk us through it.
Yes, yeah, and thanks everybody. It's good to see everyone. It feels like it's been a while. And if you're just joining us, this is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. And thanks for joining us if you're observing or a member of the public today. We will do some public comment at the end of today's conversation. Let me just share my screen with the agenda. This might be the easiest way to walk through it. And it's in the chat as well. We're doing 3 things today. The main one of which is really to talk about the agenda. The next thing for May 16th to the Climate Council. The next thing is about our schedule of additional meetings. And frankly, it's part of this agenda. So we're kind of going to bleed into this conversation about our work plan going forward, both for a council and for the steering committee. So we have some thoughts on this and wanted to make a plan together today. And then the final piece we need to do before public comment is there's some new subcommittee members that you all have been the place of officially validating that. So we want to do that. And public comment and adjourn, we've got a 1.5 hour meeting today to adjourn by 1. Okay, so that's the plan. Any questions about the agenda or comments or thoughts before we get going on it? Any concerns about it? Great. Okay. Wonderful. We do our usual approval of minutes from the last week. You can see them hyperlinked right in here in the agenda. Feel free to look through them. I'll give folks a moment if they just want to click through and remind themselves about those, and then I'll ask if there's any concerns about them. Does anybody need a little more time to look at those? No? Any concerns about last week's or last meeting's minutes? All good? Okay, I'm only seeing nodding heads, so we'll take that as a yes and consider those to be approved. Great. Okay, so let's dive into the May 16th meeting. It's hyperlinked in the agenda as well. I'll open it up and I'm happy to share my screen with it.
I'm sorry, just one thing that I was noticing from before we move on from the notes.
Yeah.
One thing I was noticing was that the minutes from 2:14 and 2:16 were not approved, and we said we'd review them and approve them at the next steering meeting.
Whoops.
So I don't know if folks have had a chance to do that or whether we should just push that to the next one with actually linking to those so we can review them ahead of time. But I think we haven't actually approved those 2 previous sets.
That's a good catch, Jared. Thank you. I'm sorry that fell through the cracks. My suggestion on that, folks, is let's, even though it's a little odd, to push it off one more time, just so people have the chance to actually read. And so it's a little bit less pro forma and more like, yep, we did capture the minutes.
Agreed.
So does that work for everybody? We'll just make sure we don't forget it again next time around. Okay. Thanks, Jared. Good catch.
David, I wonder if we could link them in the chat, and then maybe if we come back for a break or something, we could just
doing this meeting,
have a chance to look at those on a break and come back and get them approved prior to the next meeting.
Okay, we could try that.
Just a suggestion.
Yep. Yeah. And I wonder, Marion, if you were clever to drop those 2 sets of minutes in the chat.
I can do that. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Jared. That's really helpful. Okay, so moving on to May 16th, full Climate Council meeting. We sent forward a suggested, hang on just one second, I'll pull it up on my screen. A suggested agenda for that, which is just us, and I say us, me and Jane and Mary and others, trying to figure out what would be the best use of time and aligned with what we've spoken about before. And this is what we came up with, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about it. And so let me just walk through it quickly. What we thought we would do in this meeting, first, as we always have a Just Transitions reflection, we thought it'd be nice to use that as a chance to go over what Iris had presented to you the last time about a sort of more comprehensive approach to youth engagement in the Climate Council process and in the subcommittees. You all looked at that in your last meeting, you liked it, and you wanted the full council to look at it. So we thought that would be a good way to start the meeting and do our sort of Just Transition reflection around that. The next block, sort of the big block, would be around public engagement. And is that hand, sorry, Jane or Mary, do you want to use that? Do you have something to say right now?
Just wanted to comment that this will be Iris's last meeting. And so our intent would be also to use that opportunity to just recognize her for her service on the council and say goodbye.
Yeah. And if you all have some ideas about how to make that happen, we'd be open to that for sure. That's a good thing to think about. Okay. This block in the 1125 block, what we're thinking is trying to do the best summary we can of the public forums and also other pieces of public engagement that have been happening, and lift up that. And then the council considers what it's thinking about in terms of engagement priorities going forward. This is something that we've been thinking about, Jane's been thinking about. And so it's an opportunity to do some listening based on the summaries, and also an opportunity to think about priorities for the council and engagement. And we've talked about public engagement priorities in previous council meetings. We have that sort of three-pronged strategy about accessibility for the plan and doing broad-based public engagement, and then also this partner engagement. And so we can revisit that a little bit in the context of what we're hearing. So that's something we want to spend some time doing, and we have content to share, which is the content of those public forums and some other stuff. Then after a break, do 45 minutes on the rulemaking piece. And here Secretary Moore can say a little bit more about what, what would be the ask of the council here. So that's 45 minutes here. And before we go into that, I just want to show what then comes up later, and we can circle back on this. What comes up later is better part of a half an hour of just subcommittees and or task groups doing updates of what's going on, how are those conversations happening, what's happening in the different pieces of the puzzle, right? And then the final piece that we would do in the conversation would be about the work plan conversation again, what we want to have with you all right now. And using in that some lessons from this year's legislative process and what that might mean for how the council wants to use its time wisely for the rest of the year and into the fall. And then public comment and then adjourn. So those are the pieces of the puzzle that we thought would be particularly helpful for May 16th. And I'll pause there and we can dive into individual pieces or things that are missing as you see fit. Jared?
If folks want to go chronologically, my question is at the end of the agenda.
Down here?
Yeah. So I'll just pause to see if anybody wants to bring up anything before that.
Yeah. And also, Jared, I really want to do a preview of this conversation with all of you.
Yeah, that's mainly what I was thinking. I wanted to know more about kind of what was anticipated or intended about, especially the lessons learned from the legislative session, because I think that could address multiple topics or go in different directions. I mean, I think one thing that came up was around our timeline for when we're putting together budgets for the council and how that overlays with the administration and the legislative timeline around appropriations requests. And then I think there was another related, also very important topic around the transmission of the recommendations in the climate action plan to the legislature and taking stock of what has actually moved forward and what that means for the cap, what didn't move forward, and what that means for the cap and setting priorities for the next session. I think those are really important conversations. I just would love to hear more about initial thinking about how to go into them and the goals of it. So that was my
Yeah. Can we hold that thought and do that together as a steering committee? But know that those are the questions you want to answer. Yeah. The conference room.
I was about to lower my hand because Jared did just hit on the 2 points that I see as most pertinent to that conversation, and we will discuss them in more detail as we think about work planning, which, as David alluded to, sort of bleeds into this agenda too in a minute.
Great. Okay, so let's circle up. Maybe the first thing to do is to say, is there something missing that seems really obvious to you all we're not covering in this May 16 meeting that we'd want to make time for? Is there anything that feels urgent and not there? Okay, great. And may I suggest as well that after we have this second conversation about the work plan, we may come back and take a look at this agenda one more time. There may be another reason to do that. So, and then in terms of the pieces of the puzzle, the approach for youth engagement, the public engagement piece, the rulemaking piece, and then this final other piece, subcommittee updates, any guidance folks want to give on this? Secretary Moore, do you want to say a word about what you're looking for or what the agency is looking for from the council on this rulemaking process?
Sure, it's sort of twofold, and I'm not sure we will actually need 45 minutes for it. In large part because we have fairly few degrees of freedom to move around the clean car and clean truck standards. Our choice is sort of to take what California has done or to take what the federal government has done. There isn't modify and adapt this to something Vermont might prefer. And so as a result, part of the conversation is frankly just about how to best convey that information. We'll provide a status update on where California stands with their work. There's a piece of their work that isn't yet complete that I think people will feel is important. But in general, unlike other rulemaking activities where the agency accepts comments and prepares a responsiveness summary and undertakes sort of a very public process, that is reflected in the final rule, we don't have that kind of flexibility when it comes to the clean cars and clean trucks rules.
Got it. Okay. So the agency is kind of fairly rigid on this because you need to adopt what others have done here. And is there a piece that you're particularly interested in hearing from the council, or is it more the council needs to be aware of what's happening?
Well, the council, we are required to present the rules 45 days ahead of filing them with ICAR to the council, and therefore it's really just about educating the council about the details as the rules have been finalized by California in this space. And I think in other opportunities for rulemaking, there might have been more of a conversation with the council about the rules as drafted, but in this case, it will just be ensuring the council clearly articulates what the rules get us and don't get us with respect to transportation, and understanding the next steps associated with finalizing those rules.
Okay, that's helpful.
And then Megan O'Toole is on the call, who is leading the effort around advancing advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks. And she will share, she has a draft cover letter that, as well as the draft rule. I think when Secretary Moore alluded to things not being completely finalized, there'll be a complementary technical guidance document that goes with the rule, the filing of the rules, and that and all of the detailed technical analysis in the space explaining the emissions benefits and reductions we expect to realize from these rules won't be finalized yet. So the council will have to extend some leeway to the agency around updating the document as more details come in between May 16th and July of this year.
Got it. Okay, great. Any other thoughts or comments on the May 16th agenda right now? Anything folks want to say? Improvements to it, etc.
I guess I would just suggest, David, that if, as Secretary Moore said, that section maybe end up being a little bit shorter than 45 minutes. I could imagine that it could be beneficial to have extra time added to that legislative discussion, depending on where that conversation goes here. But I think that there's actually quite a bit to cover in terms of what was acted on in the cap and what wasn't, and how we do that work next year. And that, you know, maybe more than a half hour or 35 minutes could be useful there as one option.
Great. That makes sense to me. Does that make sense to others? We pull a little bit of the 45 minutes that we probably don't need full 45 minutes here, because frankly, Vermont's hands are a little tied on this, and we can.
Yeah, I
put
think
that
30
here.
minutes should suffice for that conversation. You could add the 15 to the last agenda item.
Wonderful. Okay. Does that sound good to everybody? No concerns there? Okay, great. Okay. Anything else, folks, before we move on to our next piece? Okay. And like I said, we may want to circle back to May 16th when we talk a little bit about our work plan and the implications to it. Okay, so for this next piece about our schedule meetings, Jane has prepared something to share. So why don't I just turn over you to Jane to share what you wanted to do. And I'll just note us in the chat that in addition to Chris's good suggestions about how to recognize Iris's particularly impactful and helpful roles, it looks like Marion or Jane also dropped those minutes in the chat, right? So they're there too if anybody wants to multitask on this. But Jane, why don't you walk us through sort of the thoughts process on next steps for the council and work plan and how to make that all work this year?
Sure. I thought it would be helpful just to share a few slides. One, first, trying to update you all on the current structure of ongoing work that is coming out of the climate action plan, and associated sort of timelines associated when we expect certain deadlines to be realized, propose something with upcoming council meetings, and then discuss the role of the steering committee as well in the interim, and then turn it over to you to discuss how you'd like to proceed. So let me share my screen. Sorry, trying to get it to go slide mode. Okay, it won't go. Hitting it over and over. I'm frozen.
Yeah, look, I'm waving here.
Oh yeah, look.
Can you all still hear us?
Oh yeah.
Can you see us? Are we moving on your screen?
Yeah, it's just the screen share is sort of stuck.
Yeah.
But if you want to send an email to me or something, I could share the slides.
Okay, if I can stop sharing.
Are they the same as, I think you'd sent an email this morning?
Yeah, I shared them. It won't stop sharing either. There it goes. Okay. Wait, no. Hold on. Sorry. Technology, Zoom is failing me right now.
Yeah, Zoom and you have had,
Yeah. Okay, would you mind sharing those slides, David? That I
not at
sent you?
all.
Thank you.
I'll do it right now.
And I'll make sure they weren't posted with today's meeting, so we can post them too for the public to have access to. So I'm not sure if we've, as a steering committee, taken a look at this slide as a group, but a version of it we reviewed at the last meeting. I know that as we were thinking about the role of technical analyses and where the funding was or wasn't allocated. But this is a great graphic that Marion put together to help facilitate a conversation with the Just Transition Subcommittee about where they can be most impactful at thinking about their role in implementing the guiding principles and the equity impact assessment that they developed. But I thought it would be helpful for all of you to review in thinking about where and at what timeline work will be coming out of these specific task groups, and really thinking about where the work is happening on the ground now and the role of the council steering committee, and to be frank, in the coming months, even the subcommittees, because most of the actionable work is now happening at these task group levels. So I will just be very brief, but just to update you all, knowing that you're not all intimately involved with all of this on a day-to-day basis, so that you can think about what the role of the council is and how we need to meet based on that. The life cycle analysis conversation, you all recommended the funding, the remaining $100,000 for the GWSA budget be appropriated to this RFP at your last meeting. The lead staff within DEC actually took the first shot at pulling together, based on the responses from the RFI, a draft RFP. That has been circulated to a cross-cutting task group that now also includes staff from, I should say, subcommittee members from Ag and Ecosystems. And we're actually meeting tomorrow in hopes of reaching consensus from that task group around the RFP, and then the pertinent subcommittees will convene to approve the recommendation to the agency around advancing the life cycle RFP. But if everything goes well, that RFP will be posted shortly in the coming weeks, with the expectation of it coming online sometime in early summer. Just as a reminder for all of this contractual work, if the RFPs have not already been posted, we won't be able to actually contract them until the new fiscal year, because our business office shuts down for the month of June with new contract work. So we're really looking at posting RFPs in the coming weeks, evaluating them, and then moving to contract over the summer for many of these components. So that's the life cycle analysis. The ag emissions analysis was funded by the U.S. Climate Alliance. We received word on that about a week and a half ago. The ball is in my court right now to draft the RFP. I've communicated the funding of that to the Ag and Ecosystems co-chairs and pulled together the task group that is both comprised of science and data subcommittee members and Ag and Ecosystems subcommittee members for 2 weeks from now to review the draft RFP. And again, hopefully reach consensus, as that shouldn't be much of a surprise, because much of the articulated components of that RFP will come right from the recommendations that Ag and Eco put in the Climate Action Plan, and that we subsequently put in the grant to the U.S. Climate Alliance. We were short funded a little bit, just we had asked for $100,000 and only received $70,000 and change. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to still answer all the questions that were put forward. But if things need to be constricted, we'll work on that with the task group to think about what, where, and what we cut back on. The biomass and transportation task groups are moving. They are meeting bi-weekly. Well, actually, biomass is meeting bi-weekly, and transportation is meeting every week. Those meetings, transportation meets Monday at the end of the day from 3:30 to 5. And Biomass, starting this Wednesday, will meet every other Wednesday from 8:30 to 10 in the morning. The Biomass group is at a space where we are finalizing an active scope of work informed by the tabled actions from Ag and Eco. Those tabled actions, some of those tabled actions were determined to be covered by the life cycle analysis and not Biomass task group. Others were determined as settled based on the primary recommendation of a clean heat standard and the use of wood heat as a clean heat measure. And then the Biomass task group agreed on a suite of components that they would further explore in an active voice. So taken those tabled actions, which determined what the outcome would be and made them more exploratory. We're meeting on Wednesday to come to agreement on the scope, as well as have our first guest speaker, who's a scientist that will be looking at the greenhouse gas emissions benefits from pellet use, specifically in the northeastern forest. Transportation has been doing the ongoing webinars to raise both the council and public's awareness of the issues in the transportation sector. There's a draft RFP, but no funding yet for transportation RFP and analysis. That issue of funding, transportation was not funded by the U.S. Climate Alliance fully. It was a portion of it was funded to further explore the impacts and benefits of advanced clean cars 2 and advanced clean trucks. But the second phase of our ask to U.S. Climate Alliance are around really understanding what the climate action plan gets us for emissions reductions and what that gap is between where we need to be statutorily. That was not funded by the U.S. Climate Alliance, largely because they said, you're getting new funds from IIJA for carbon reduction strategies, and you should use your IIJA funds to fund the transportation analysis you want to do. So we're continuing to have those conversations with AOT, with the transportation task group about how to align the timing of the transportation recommendations, the analysis needed, also with the IIJA opportunities and requirements of that funding. And we'll be meeting this afternoon to further discuss that.
Can you spell out that acronym just quickly, Jane, for folks?
Oh my God, I actually feel like it's the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
Yeah.
Okay, the infrastructure bill. Yeah.
Yeah, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But I couldn't have actually told you what IIJA stands for, so thanks for that.
Okay, got it.
And so those are the two substantive committees, and I'll just remind you that those both were intended to formulate recommendations for the council to consider this spring, but both have kicked the can to fall timeline to have substantive outputs for the council to be deliberating on and considering addendums to the climate action plan. So those really lend itself to a lot of fall conversations with the council. The Municipal Vulnerability Index, I have all my final comments back on that. We have sign off from the Agency of Digital Services and are poised to post that RFP hopefully later this week or next week. And the same timeline goes with that, that we would hope to have something on contract by this summer. And that is a group that is really managed by Rural Resilience, but we have some great input and task group members from Just Transitions appreciating that there's a lot of equity and vulnerability considerations for frontline and impacted communities in that tool that we intend to develop. I'll pause and let Marian speak to the work of Climate Toolkit since she's leading that.
Sure. So the Climate Toolkit has been meeting on a bi-weekly basis, made up of staff and subcommittee members, primarily from the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, but also with support from Just Transition Subcommittee and Science and Data Subcommittee. So it's a great group of folks. They have done quite some public engagement with specific stakeholder groups focused on municipal governments and volunteers, looking at what outcomes would make sense for development of a toolkit that's really focused on supporting municipalities and capacity and connection to resources for adaptation and resilience. They're looking at continuing some public engagement with municipalities that have a specific interest on equity and justice and really reaching marginalized communities. So we're moving forward with that, identifying resources to be included in the toolkit, and then meeting with our IT folks at the end of May to start thinking about design options for the toolkit, as it will likely be a page on the climate change website with links to resources. So that work's continuing and hoping to move forward with some design options later this month.
So, and then finally, the last task group that's actively meeting, we meet bi-weekly on Monday afternoons right after this, the public engagement task group. We held our 2 public forums. CBI has assimilated all the notes from all the folks who facilitated breakout groups and took notes. We plan to circulate those, the comments that we received, the public feedback, which was specific to the ongoing work of the Climate Council, with all of you at the May 16th meeting. And then we've also been really focused on within that group what partner engagement looks like. And we had a really great meeting recently with the Vermont Council on Rural Development, specifically around how to partner deeply with rural communities and utilize their networks in that space. And David's been fostering conversations and dialogue with other highlighted communities that we want to work with. And we're going to revisit all of that this afternoon and think about next steps in that space, as well as think about, now that we have finished those 2 broad-based events, what further do we want to do broadly or with broad-based engagement? Like, what kind of listening sessions do we as a council want to propose, and how do we set criteria for how we move those forward and advance those? So that conversation will happen today and then be further advanced with the council on the 16th. And then finally, the measuring and assessing progress tool. You'll all remember that based on the framework and conversation that we had over the course of developing the climate action plan, we had enough information to go on to develop an RFP. That has been with ADS for review and consideration around the IT component of that RFP for a long time. And I just got comments back on Friday at 5:30 at night. So feel very excited about continuing to work to advance that RFP. There are further considerations in that RFP, since we've been having conversations internally about how to make that tracking tool align and vice versa with the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And then also in just transitions, we've been thinking about what equity and what the guiding principles and other components look like as we want to think about tracking progress in that space as well. So we'll take a finer look at that RFP with the right folks in the coming weeks, and hopefully the same can post that in the coming weeks as well. I'm going to pause there before we go to the next slide, since that was a lot, and just see if there's any questions on this slide, and then use that to talk about council meetings and steering committee meetings.
Any questions, clarifying questions for Jane, Marion on this, all the activity that's happening?
Great.
Okay.
So upcoming council meetings, we currently have a meeting on the books for June 13th that we are proposing canceling. I'll say selfishly, David, myself, and Marion all cannot be at this meeting. And so it forced us to take a hard look at whether or not it was needed. And so the current proposal for what that meeting would have focused on was updates from the biomass and transportation work that was ongoing, but no decision points were really needed. It was largely update. And so there are other ways that we could consider how to get the council those updates. And Erica Borneman can't be there either. So, and then we were also, a lot will be happening with public engagement in the coming months around the work that we'll need to do for rulemaking, around our own public engagement strategy. So I think that would be an ongoing focus and conversation for the council at all meetings. But again, no decision point is needed in June. So we're proposing canceling that meeting. And as we talk through what the steering committee role will be over the coming months, we see other ways to have those updates come out to council members and really encourage the council members, councilors to participate in steering committee meetings as pertinent to topics they want to stay informed on. So what that means is we had already discussed a summer break for the council, really appreciating that summer is a hard time to meet and appreciating that there isn't a really mandatory need to get together. So we want to think with you all about fall meetings and determine a schedule for what that could look like. I think that the fall is really going to be a critical time for substantive components. The consideration of the biomass and transportation recommendations will percolate up to the subcommittee. The budget process is something that Jared has already alluded to and something that we've discussed with all of you around what appropriate timeline would be for the council to consider a recommendation for an ongoing budget. And then I just want to put out there that there is a need or an interest, as Jared suggested, to reflect on what was taken up by the legislature this year and what further prioritization, if the council wants to do, around future actions that the legislature could consider in a new biennium next year. And then, of course, there'll be a lot of ongoing work in the public engagement space and also around technical analyses around all of these things that the council can see presentations on and get updated on in the fall. That none of that will be ready in the summertime. So rather than taking questions here, maybe I'll just suggest that we go to the steering committee meeting slide and then go back and forth here. So even though the council won't meet between now, perhaps based on your recommendation today, meet between now and September, propose that the steering committee continue to meet monthly. And I feel like the steering committee has a role to play in the coming months around what the subcommittee roles and needs are. This is a real tension that we're feeling right now in some subcommittees with these task groups really being the place for active work, trying to articulate roles and responsibilities for when work comes back up from task groups to subcommittees, and whether or not subcommittees need to stay in a cadence of meeting or whether subcommittees can meet as infrequently as they want. It's really just Ag and Ecosystems has no meeting on the schedule or no plans to meet. So other subcommittees seem to be checking in and having monthly meetings. Just want to feel like if there's any guidance or support that the steering committee would like to put out there, that could be a conversation. I think that if the council is to consider prioritization in the fall, the steering committee would be the place for us to discuss what that process looks like to propose to the council so that it could be a productive conversation. So want to propose that as a topic of continued meeting. I feel like it would be a space to encourage the council and councilors to attend to hear about public engagement, as well as to foster a dialogue about updates of the work that's carrying forward. And then, of course, there's room for you all to discuss other roles and responsibilities for the steering committee in the coming months. So that's what I got for work planning. We would benefit from hearing from all of you about how this feels and what else we should be thinking about, or you all should be thinking about, I should say.
I'm dropping slides just for a moment to talk, but feel free to just say, can you pull that slide up? Chris, go ahead.
I had to take a call, so I may have missed this elsewhere, so I apologize if I did. Who is going to take on like public outreach explaining what's in any legislation that gets passed related to the council? Like explaining what the laws would do and what it means for, households, businesses, et cetera. Is that, have we discussed that, or is that the council subcommittees? Who's going to do that? We're all deep in it, right? I don't think we should assume that because the legislature discussed it, the general public should understand what in the heck it is.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's something Jane and company you all have.
I mean, I would imagine the agencies and departments that have jurisdiction around the laws will do outreach and communication with the public around how they get moved forward and implemented. We certainly don't have in our budget or capacity for A&R to do outreach and engagement around laws that are stood up that aren't germane to our agency.
Correct.
All right. Right, so it's like moving into that next place of the agency or whoever is responsible party under legislation would be that one, as opposed to the climate council itself. Does that make sense, Chris? Let me just bounce back to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, it might, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, it could, it could certainly, it could work well. I hope the agencies will make a point of doing public outreach that, I'm just thinking back to just transitions, part of what we talked about is making sure the general public understands what it is that is being implemented and how it's going to affect folk. So I hope it's not going to be just, regular meetings on rulemakings and that kind of thing. If not, that's probably something the council, should contemplate going forward about what it means, to actually, not just engage with the public, as part of kind of like the mandatory hearing processes and all of that, but actually trying to help explain what it means for life and living in Vermont. So it could work great. Just think it may be something we want to keep an eye on and put on our agenda to discuss going forward.
Thanks, Chris. And I wonder if, just thinking aloud with you on this, if what the steering committee and the council takes on is a set of ideas and vision of what they would like to see agencies to do, rather than taking on the responsibility of the actual communication. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Like
that could help as part of even your, unfortunately, I'll be driving back from North Carolina on the 16th, but on the 16th agenda where you guys are talking about public outreach, that may be a subset of things to discuss. What does that look like in kind of a really effective way? So yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Jared, go ahead. And if folks want to weigh in on that conversation with Chris, just let me know. Jared?
Yeah, especially because I was going to raise something different, even though I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what, Jane, you put forward, both in terms of the suggestion of not having the June council meeting and doing monthly steering meetings going forward. One thing I'm thinking about is, I think one of the, there's lots of value in the different council meetings we've been holding, but I think one really valuable part has been the ability, so many of us are really deep in one or two subcommittees and don't always have kind of eyes and ears about what's happening in the other subcommittees, is those updates. And so I think if we don't have a June council meeting and or a July or August meeting, it would be great to have those subcommittee updates happen at the steering committee, the monthly steering committee meeting, and invite any councilors who are interested in hearing those and or, the fuller steering committee agenda to attend. I mean, of course, councilors, anybody are always welcome to attend the public steering committee meetings, but it might just be worth kind of extra kind of reminder about that, given that we won't have full council meetings, and specifically adding those subcommittee updates to the steering committee agendas for those summer months.
Sounds great to me. Any reactions to that, folks, about making that explicit in your steering committee meetings? And as Jane said, also making explicit that it's an opportunity and encourage counselors to show up and come and listen in so they know they're updated. Okay. Thanks, Jared. Yeah. Okay. So just as a quick check-in, are folks feeling comfortable with what Jane's putting out there? This idea of monthly steering committee meetings, but after May 16th, the council wouldn't get back together until the fall. Folks feeling good about that? Any thoughts about how to make that better? Jared, go ahead, please.
I think it depends on our definition of fall. I certainly wouldn't want to go any farther than September. And it also would feel I don't know. I personally feel a little uncomfortable going more than 2 months without a council meeting. I think it would be fine to not do June and July, but I think we want to just retain the opportunity to schedule something late summer, depending on what's emerging. And but I guess just speaking for myself, I'd be okay saying for now, only one planned meeting for the council between now and September, and then restart at least a monthly schedule starting in September.
Yeah. How do others feel? Similar views, different views?
I'm just not sure it's practical to think we're gonna find a date in August for folks to meet. Honestly, I think we could target the week after Labor Day and probably be much more successful than we will be in finding a quorum of folks that will gather in August. And I mean, maybe we could send out a poll, Jane, with some dates that include some late August options, but I suspect it will be difficult until kids are back in school and we're post Labor Day.
Thanks, Julie. Chris?
Yeah, I'll just add, we're taking that approach within our own commission, because after surveying commissioners and then frankly looking at my staff schedules, there's still so much pent-up vacation demand because of the pandemic and just people not seeing each other. I would say I'll also argue the same thing, frankly, for the subcommittees. I think you're gonna start seeing pretty lean attendance there too. I just not to punt on work during the summer, but I just think it's going to be pretty challenging to get folk together. And just one other thing too, just looking ahead to those fall meetings, it does seem like one of the agenda items should be kind of a legislative recap on what was passed and what it means for execution of the climate action plan, the initial climate action plan, and how it's moved, how it's likely to apt to move us towards achieving the plan goals. Not trying to dump work on folk, but seems like we're just kind of a check-in with each other. Because I don't want us to assume that everybody has paid attention to what's going on in various pieces of legislation. So that it would probably be good to even just familiarize ourselves with that. So something maybe that doesn't necessarily have to be September. That could be October even, or November.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. And I want to go even deeper on that point in just a second, because I think it speaks to what Jared was trying to get at. Lauren?
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. I would think that should be September, though, just knowing how much time and planning there needs to be potentially for the fall. And then once you get into November, then you start hitting the holidays again. Then before you know it, we're in 2023. I would definitely agree that an August meeting would be really challenging, just knowing that Vermonters seem to really take August off, or, kind of our own little European holiday month. But would like to see a meeting in September and not hold until October, knowing that we can always retain the right to call a special meeting if a decision point is needed between now and then.
Thanks, Lauren. That's helpful. Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing is general alignment with the approach, a little scariness, like, wow, it's a long time, but frankly, a little concern about scheduling over the summer anyway. And Secretary Moore puts out there this idea of let's aim for the week after Labor Day, so the second week of September. So it's early September, first half of September, and we get going. We have a clear fall work plan to do what we need to do. Okay, so that's what I'm hearing. I want to circle back on the question of how this reflection on the legislative process and the conversation we want to have on May 16th and the implications that has for our schedule and the work of the Climate Council. And this is what I had sort of tabled for a second there, Jared, what you were trying to put on and discuss. And I wonder if we want to come back to that right now. And Jane, I know you had some thoughts on this as well. But Jared, do you want to put back out there what you were thinking in terms of what would be constructive in terms of the council conversation about this and the implications for the council's work in the fall?
Yeah, I think a couple of components would be if we could look at a planned timeline for the development of the administration's budget and for the legislature's expected consideration of appropriations requests, and just look at how that unfolded this year versus what kind of our more ideal timeframe would look like next year and going forward, just at like a very logistical level. I think that would be really helpful. I think, and I've already done some of this, I know other members of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee have done this with regard to the emissions reduction requirements. And I imagine kind of, A&R staff and others have done this as well, starting to look at kind of what pieces of what recommendations in the climate action plan either are or seem likely, we'll know more soon, to move forward from the legislature, and depending on the governor's decisions on some of those as well. I think it would be really helpful to have a high level overview of very relevant climate related funding decisions and policies that moved forward this session, others that may have been, proposed but not moved forward, and others that were simply not taken up. There were a number of very important recommendations in the CAP that weren't taken up. And I sympathize with the capacity questions, and that there was a lot to do, and that many of the really key priorities were taken up. But I think it's worth having eyes on what wasn't, and considering what that means for how we as a council want to try to lift up, prioritize, and work with the administration and the legislature to bring more focus and priority to some of those outstanding, really key recommendations. Those are my initial thoughts.
Thanks, Jared. And how do others feel about that? Because that is kind of what we had imagined starting to talk about on May 16th. And then on the basis of that, and how you all as a steering committee try to set this up with us, then in September, October, November, we'd be implementing those kinds of conversations along the lines of what Jared's saying. How are people feeling about that? Is that hitting right? Chris, that sounds right to you? Great. Lauren, I see you nodding your head. I don't know, Liz, if you have a feeling about that. Does that work? Okay. Okay. And Secretary Clauser, all set. Okay. All right. So it sounds like what we need to do is start that on May 16th, right? We start that conversation. We won't have clarity on everything that's happened, but we'll have a lot of clarity. I understand, Jane knows better than I. So, but by May 16th, there'll be some clarity. We won't have the ability to do exactly that analysis of this made it through, this didn't make it through, this was never picked up. We'll have some very preliminary looks at that. And we'll have enough, though, to say, what do we want to do as a council about this going in to the fall? Okay. Any thoughts on that in addition to what we're saying right now? Okay.
I'm just curious if Jane or Secretary Moore, as you kind of suggested that to bring this forward for discussion, did that largely kind of track and match with what I said, or were you thinking anything additional as well?
No, I think that tracks, Jared. I think for the May meeting, we should be mindful that most things, we won't have a comprehensive look yet at what's being signed and what isn't. And rather than having it be just an open conversation about the legislative session, we were trying to target it into what it means for work planning for the council, which is why we sort of packaged it in the work planning session. So I think that asking the questions of what's needed to do that for the fall and proposing that some of the framework that you just suggested makes a lot of sense.
just so everyone's on the same page and make sure that there's a shared understanding. So even if the legislature's completed their work, it's unlikely that all of these bills will have made it through the governor's review process. And so just in terms of timing, should the legislature achieve their goal of adjourning this Friday or Saturday, it remains highly unlikely that by May 16th, final action will have been taken on all bills.
Right. So it's more like a preliminary conversation based on sort of what we know so far and thinking about how that we as a council, you as a council want to schedule your time and invest your time in the fall. Okay. And then I think what I understood also from Jane, which makes a lot of sense to me, is that you as a steering committee over the summer help us as a facilitation team think about how to structure conversation and get to the actual conversation the council should have. And that would be part of our work over the summer together as steering committee. Okay. Great. So anything else about work plan and our work, council's work, steering committee, anything else? Okay.
Hey, David, quick question. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Are the House appointees for 2 years?
Now that's a good point. Jane, you had something to say about that.
Yeah, I actually almost raised my hand earlier as a reminder. Paying House appointees will be up this October. And so some people will be, could have the potential to be reappointed, or we could be thinking about a third new council members come October.
I was just going to suggest add in the fall agenda, potentially an orientation for new council members.
That's great. And Marion's been has put together a really thoughtful orientation for new subcommittee members that we have scheduled for 2 days in the month of May that her and I will be doing. And she's put together a great guidance document that links to all the relevant presentations and components of the CAP and other things that you all as council members had early on. And so we can work off of that to modify that to get counselors up to speed in the fall too.
Great.
That's great. Okay. Okay. So I'm taking away from this conversation that you as a steering committee are okay with what Jane presented. You're eager to have something early in September, maybe the week after Labor Day. If there's an urgent thing that comes up for the council over the summer, we can call a meeting if we need to. We just know that's going to be hard to convene folks. You all as a steering committee are committing to monthly meetings where there's a suggestion that we have subcommittee and task group check-ins in those meetings. And we encourage counselors to join in those steering committee meetings. So that's what I'm hearing. And then this conversation we just had about, how to talk about the council's priority work in the fall is let's have a reflection about the legislative session. We can start that on May 16th, but we won't have everything we need to do it, but we can start it there. And then over the summer, we can be thinking about how to structure the council meetings to get to the conversations we want to get to. Okay, great. Super. And meanwhile, all that other work's going on, right? All those task groups are cooking along, doing their thing, creating RFPs, getting work going. So it's a busy, busy time. All right. So the last thing we wanted to do together is the subcommittee appointees, right? And there's some hyperlink here in the agenda for that. I can pull that up.
I have it, David.
You have it. Can you share your screen?
Working. So we, as a continuation of process, you all need to bless and update the subcommittee composition. We currently have been moving forward with recruitment for all subcommittees. I think all subcommittees related to youth involvement and engagement And then specifically for just transitions, rural resilience and adaptation, and science and data, we had specific requests on the survey that we put out and nomination process for specific expertise we were looking for. And then with Commissioner Walk's departure from A&R, we're also thinking about a new co-chair for cross-sector mitigation, as well as updating some membership on that subcommittee related to Agency of Natural Resources representation, as well as some further expertise around the substantive areas of work, specifically biomass, with Peter leaving. So for today, I think the most pertinent updates, rural resilience and adaptation and science and data are still vetting a robust list of additional subcommittee members. And we expect at your next steering committee meeting, those two subcommittees will have an updated roster of subcommittee members. For now, this has just been cleaned up related to some changes in science and data related to Lou, one subcommittee member moving over to work for PSD. He left the subcommittee. This is just an accurate representation of who sits on that science and data subcommittee right now. Rural resilience, specific to just transitions, they've nominated, they have quite a long list of 6 new subcommittee members. I want to remind you all that the process roadmap articulated guidance of 10 to 12 subcommittee members for best practice. A lot of that had to do with reaching consensus and having a manageable size group in order to get the representation we wanted, and also expertise, but also to be able to have quorum and move towards putting forward recommendations for the CAP. I think in our conversations specifically with just transitions, as well offhand with rural resilience, we're thinking more about the people and necessary expertise needed to do the work now, to do the implementation components of the CAP and advise us on that. And so it doesn't feel as wedded to a small size anymore. The only challenge is around quorum. And so Just Transitions really wanted to extend an invitation to all 6 of these subcommittee members to join. So they will have 17 subcommittee, 19.
Doesn't count the co-chairs.
Well, that's what I was adding. I thought it was 17.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, 17 subcommittee members with Sue and Abby Willard as the co-chair now. Sarah Phillips stepped down from being co-chair, and Abby is now the designee for Secretary Tebbets as co-chair. So I'll just keep going real quick, and then if there's any questions, we can speak to that. And then the only other thing, cross-sector is meeting this week on Thursday. We have a proposal for a new co-chair there that cross-sector will discuss. We also have a proposal for an additional subcommittee member who will be joining that meeting. So we'll discuss that with the subcommittee this week, and then bring it back to you next month. And just to note, TJ Poor, I think you have all approved this, but he's moved from science and data to cross-sector. And then Andrea Wright is a new environmental program manager for AOT. And this subcommittee amazingly didn't have any representation from Agency of Transportation. So Andrea is also already been approved as a recommended addition by this subcommittee at their last meeting back in March. So as of now, this is most up to date, but we expect this to come back to the steering committee at your next meeting with robust additions to resilience, science and data, and then some minor changes to cross-sector. Jared, go ahead.
Sorry, Jane, just one minor thing. For consistency, it looks like most of the time when we're listing agency staff that are the designee of an administration counselor, we're listing the counselor's name and then the staff person in parentheses after. So I'm wondering if we want to list Joe, Secretary Flynn that way, and then Andrea as
We
his
decided
designee.
to only do that for co-chairs, because there's a specific role that co-chairs play you're supposed to have a designee from the legislative branch and a designee from the administration as co-chairs. But it was kind of awkward having all these different people and having them be designees. They're just subcommittee members in my mind at this point and don't need to be a designee of any administration official.
Okay.
If that's appropriate for everyone. But that's the way we decided to carry it forward.
Great. So the request of the steering committee today is to say, looks good, or I have some concern about particularly these two that have the longer lists, right? And we're still waiting on the other two to come back, right?
Yes.
Okay. So are there any concerns about the proposal here? Any feedback? Great.
Oh,
Yeah, Secretary Moore.
sorry, I'm not, I'm not controlling the machine. I do worry about getting to 17 members on the Just Transition Subcommittee. I appreciate sort of the diversity of perspectives and experience, but I think at some point it becomes challenging to both gather all of those people together to reach any form of consensus around the work. And I struggle because it's sort of in opposition, I think, to the whole concept of just transitions. And in some ways, I'm willing to defer to the judgment of the co-chairs. But I at least want, to put my concern on record that I feel like this is, it's getting large enough to the point of being unwieldy. And it's just something we're going to need to pay attention to.
Yeah, Chris?
Am I the only one here from Just Transitions?
I think so.
So we talked about that during Just Transitions, and appreciate your concern, Secretary Moore. That was raised during the meeting, but I think the committee'd like to give it a try at least and see how it works.
So two key things there. Oh, go ahead, Lauren. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, you should respond if you wanted to respond on that, David.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say the two key things, it sounds, around having a large group, because there's real benefits of having the diversity of folks on there. The key things are a practical one, which is quorum, right? And then the second one is decision-making and our ability to actually, settle on some decisions going forward. So I think we just need to carry those two concerns forward and make sure we have some thoughtful approaches for both of them. Lauren, is your comment on that same issue or on a separate issue?
it's on a separate issue, but the issue of size still.
Okay, well,
I
go
can
ahead.
wait if Jared wants to respond to the Just Transition specifically.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on the last thing that you said, David, in terms of the decision making in subcommittees. And I think that we articulated this, and I can't remember the exact name that we gave the document, but basically our agreed, operating procedures. And in my mind, what we've always said is that what gets lifted up from subcommittees are recommendations, but that formal decisions are held for the council. I think that if there were actual decisions being made at the subcommittee level, it would be more of a concern in terms of how many and the composition and the kind of process that's used. I think that there is a real, to me, I feel like there is, regardless of the subcommittee, across all of them, I think that one of the things that gives me a lot of confidence is at the end of the day, any decision would have to come to the council, which has the democratic legitimacy of either having been appointed by the legislature or the governor. I think the subcommittees are really important and helpful to, as work groups, surface, recommendations. But I just want to pause on that kind of language, because I continue to see decisions as being held and made by the council and recommendations being made by the subcommittees.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay. All right. So I don't want to keep pushing you off, Lauren, but Chris, was that a direct response to
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think Jared's recollection is right, but also I'll just note Just Transitions is almost by definition probably had one of the most diverse memberships of the others. I've been participating in a lot of subcommittees, and I think we've been able to find consensus pretty regularly after very, oftentimes difficult and very robust conversations. So again, I would just, I think as the concerns of the steering committee are duly noted, I'd say that they were also, again, raised by the Just Transition Subcommittee itself, and will definitely be, the subcommittee will definitely be paying attention. If it's not doable, that lesson learned. If it's doable, another lesson learned, and I don't think there's anything to worry about.
So with that, on this issue, are we okay moving forward with this? Secretary Moore, are you okay moving forward with that conversation?
I guess I'd like to request a report back, maybe 6 months from now, including attendance at meetings. The quorum issue is one thing, but the ability to have consensus-based decision-making, if you're not seeing a significant majority of members attend each meeting, is another thing. And just would like that feedback sooner than not as to whether this larger committee size is actually tenable.
Secretary Moore, could we amend that all subcommittees be subject to that metric? Because just because you have a smaller membership doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have quorum either, I would. We can certainly do that. It's not a good look, though, I would say, to hold up Just Transitions only to that measure.
I'm happy for that amendment. I mean, it really is a reflection of the size of the committee and whether that's a workable size since we've exceeded our own guideline. I don't think it's anything other than that, Chris.
Great. Okay.
Maybe I'll just add one comment on that also, is that I think that as we're in this period of implementation, it's different, but we'll be back in a period of writing a climate action plan in 2 years. And as the size changes, it'll impact what the subcommittees look like when we get to that point of developing a new plan as well.
Okay. Lauren, thanks for being patient.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I think the only thing I was going to add was that similar to the conversation about a committee potentially being too large, I think that even though agriculture and ecosystems isn't currently actively meeting, there might be a need to in the near-ish future, acknowledging that we lost John Roberts a couple of months ago, and with Iris's imminent departure, that we're going to be down to 8 or so, I think. And don't want to assume that the newly appointed youth member would necessarily want to sit on that subcommittee. So just flagging that there might be a need for that subcommittee to reconvene and consider their membership and make sure that we also have diverse representation and enough people to accommodate for the scope of work that we have to cover.
Nice. Thanks, Lauren. Okay. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah. Okay. Okay, Jane, anything else on the issue of subcommittee membership?
Nope, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. So that's it for us. We want to do some public comment. Why don't we do public comment? Unless there's something else I'm missing here. But if there are folks who have been joining our conversation today and would like to join in with a comment, now's a great time. So if you've been listening in and you'd like to weigh in, please do so. We're quite a small group today, so raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. I'll pause for a second here for non-steering committee members. Okay. All right. Okay, so I've been seeing a little bit in the chat, folks who've been reading the minutes from the previous meetings, the ones that somehow I forgot to approve. So let's just take a pause here. Do folks want just a minute or two to read those? Does anybody need a little more time? Just say, yeah, no problem. Say it. Anyone wants just a second more time? Okay. Any concerns with us approving those minutes right now? Again, we're talking about the minutes from February and March, I think. Any concerns about doing that right now? Any final concerns about the content of those minutes? Okay, great. We'll consider those approved as well. Thanks everyone for doing that. And apologies for that. Okay. I don't have anything else on the list that I'm aware of. What am I missing? No, we're good? Okay, great. Okay, folks, well, I think we actually finished early today, which
How
is
unlike us.
how unlike us. Good for us. A round of applause for all of us. Thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing you on May 16th. We will be more specific about scheduling our meetings, steering committee meetings in the future, right? So Jane, I guess maybe you and Mary can think about putting some dates on the books.
If they're not scheduled, they should be the first Monday of every month. So if
Okay,
they're not scheduled, that's my intent to carry that forward unless hearing any objections. No.
okay, great. Great.
Yeah, they're scheduled. There's not a public calendar at all.
Okay, great, folks. Well, I think we're done. And thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Happy Monday.
Thanks, everyone. It's good to see you.
Take care. Yep, all the best.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
thanks.
Yeah, and Monday, the first Monday.